Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Comics. I'm your host, Jim Dougherty, and today we have got a fun guest for you. Someone who has got a unique perspective on this whole comic book making experience. But first, if you are new to this show, welcome. This show goes one-on-one with your favorite creators in comics, and we find out how they got into comics, why they got into comics, what they're still doing in comics, and what they have coming up in comics. Today's guest is Aubrey Sitterson. Aubrey Sitterson started out as an editor at Marvel, working on a number of big titles. He also then went to go work with one Robert Kirkman, editing a number of his books, like The Walking Dead. And so it's an experience and it's a part of his career that Aubrey says he's kind of tried to not talk about for a while, but we get him to talk about it because we're going to talk about his new book at Image, his first book at Image, a book called Free Planet with Jed Dougherty, and why this book truly is a culmination of his entire working experience as a comics professional, in a sense. This new book is a blast. It's got big ideas, it's got big action, and it's got even bigger heart. It's also a book that's going to make you think. And it's fun, it's fiery, it's got something to say, and in talking to Aubrey about it, I think there is no doubt in my mind that you immediately are going to go run to your retailer and say, holy crap, I need a copy of this book. So in this episode, we dig into what the book is about, how it came together, and why Aubrey believes comics can and should stand for something. We also talk about, like I said, we're going to talk about his path and why comics should be punching up, not down, and how much fun making those comics are. So buckle up, keep all arms and legs inside the tram at all time. And if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's talk comics. Aubrey, welcome.
Hey man, thank you for having me. Is this my second time or my third? Is this my third time on the show? Do you know?
This is the second. I think this is
the
your
second.
time. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was almost going to be the third, but then I stopped doing the show the first time around. And
okay.
So we never
that blew it. But we've continued the championship reign history.
Oh,
the
100%.
belt history is maintained here.
I mean, I think what you're probably thinking of is that like I did your show twice.
Oh, back when I was doing Straight Shoot.
Back when you were doing Straight Shoot. Aubrey is also a podcast veteran.
This is ancient history we're digging.
Could you imagine if you were still doing Straight Shoot today?
No.
I try not to
think about it. No, I love doing Straight Shoot, but it was a lot of work. It was a wrestling.
It was
a weekly wrestling podcast, and I had to watch so much wrestling. And after years of doing Straight Shoot, and then the years of research that went into that wrestling nonfiction book that I did, I needed to detox, man. Yeah, I had to take quite a few steps back. It was just a lot.
Anyway, we've already gone off the rails. This is perfect. We are here to talk about a number of things. We're here to talk about the comic book making process, how and why you are still in the business, and
I don't know the answer to that.
Look, I asked.
I was hoping you could weigh in on that.
But most importantly, we are also here to talk about your Image debut.
Hell yeah,
with Free Planet.
Yes, sir.
So to get started, I'd like to talk about you've been in the business for a long time, like
for a minute, yeah.
Alluded to, right? What do you think makes you doing Free Planet now, given everything that you've learned up to this point, makes it like, how is this the ultimate Aubrey Sitterson comic?
That's a great question, and I mean, because it is the ultimate Aubrey Sitterson comic. Like it is a fire hose of everything that I am interested in, both in terms of approach to the comics medium, so from a formal perspective, as well as narrative subject matter wise. It's everything that I'm interested, all slammed together with one of my absolute favorite guys to work with, Jed Dougherty, who's my co-creator on the project. you know, it's it's been a while since I've had something on the shelves. I had a
Mhm.
really big 2021, three different limited series from Dark Horse Comics, three different successfully crowdfunded comics, and I was really proud of and excited about all of that work. And it came out at an inopportune time for the comic book industry coming out of COVID pencils down and the material just got lost in the
Mhm.
market. And there are a lot of, and believe me, I've thought about all of them, right? I am a compulsive overthinker and over analyzer in terms of, what do we call it? Like a hot wash, a
Mhm.
debrief, right? On things that I've done. And there's a ton of different reasons behind this stuff, and I could spend all day enumerating them to you, but I was very disappointed by the reception or the lack thereof to a lot of that work, and that it didn't lead to more and
Mhm.
additional. And I realized that there are all these variables that are outside of my control in terms of why those books didn't do better, but there are things that are within my control. And
Mhm.
I also, you mentioned it prior, like I've been in comics my entire adult life, right? My first
Mhm.
job out of college was at Marvel. I was still in college when I started working at
Oh,
Marvel.
was it really? Were you an intern at Marvel?
I was an intern and then I was an editorial assistant. So I was working part time at
Oh.
Marvel while I was still in college. So I've been in comics my entire adult life, and which
Mhm.
is deranged to think
I know.
about.
I know. I
But
still I
I,
still have a hard time trying to explain to my parents what it is I do, and it's
yeah, they
like
they don't need to know. It's
they
fine.
don't need to
Just make something up.
know.
They love you no matter what.
Yeah.
The I had s- I had expected so much, and things didn't pan out the way I wanted them to, and I was very
Mhm.
frustrated by it. And you know, having been in comics for so long, I'm cognizant of the fact that you don't get an unlimited amount of chances. And I've had a lot of
Mhm.
chances, man, and I've had a lot of swings at the ball, and I wasn't entirely sure of how many more I was going to get. And simultaneously, I was frustrated by I thought I was doing the thing. I thought I was doing the things that people wanted. I thought I was
Mhm.
doing what you were supposed to do, which was these, very high concept, it's a barbarian woman and a beast man and it's a rom-com. There you go. Here's this thing. It's like, like
Right.
I thought that, it's Dragon Ball, but it's like an emotional soap opera, right? Like these are I don't know if, these are my books, obviously, that I'm describing right now. Uh I thought I was doing the thing, and I thought I was doing like the right type of approach and writing these things in a way that the market expected them, and I was working within a framework that I had identified as being de rigueur, right? And that stuff didn't pay off for me, and I took a bunch of steps back, and I went up on my mountain, and I thought extensively about, you know, if this is my last comic, what does it look like? Right?
Mhm.
What is the comic that I can be happy with being my final comic? Right?
Mm.
Not because like I'm angry and picking my ball and going home, but
Sure.
because what if I don't get like if I have this huge opportunity at Image, and if this book doesn't hit, I don't think I get more Image opportunities. Image is running a business, right? It's not a charity for my benefit, though I wish it was. And likewise, I've done work at a lot of places, and the industry starts to make up its mind about you. And I thought, okay, I need to shift the perception of what I'm doing. I need to ensure that this comic that I'm working on now is something that in my old age I can point to as the example of what I think is the ideal approach to comics, right?
Mhm.
A thesis statement, from Aubrey on what comics can accomplish and what they
Right.
should aspire to. And that was the North Star. That was the North Star for everything about Free Planet. The idea existed somewhat earlier than that. I had started talking to Jed about it and we started piecing it together. But over the course of years of working on this thing, it became a much richer tapestry. It became much more complex. And I think a big part of that is due to a narrowing of focus on my part, right?
Mhm.
Instead of working on three different miniseries and three different Kickstarters and a half dozen pitches at all
Mhm.
times, which is what I had done since I left Marvel, right? My
Right.
practically my entire adult life, I have had at least half a dozen pitches somewhere at some stage of completion, right? Whether it's talking to an artist about an idea or actually, going back and forth with an editor and every
Mhm.
stage in between. And it was just too much. I
So
realized
does
that
the
for me,
idea for Free Planet happen at some point during the some of the other books that you've done, or is
yeah,
this a
yeah,
little
it
after that?
existed. It existed for a while. I think probably I first started thinking about Free Planet probably 2017, 2018, something like that. So it's been in the back of my head for a long time. Jed came on board afterwards,
Okay.
after Savage Hearts, when we were talking about, doing something new together and trying to,
Mhm.
again, like, you know, this part and parcel with this, I started to think. So Robert Kirkman, you may have heard of him. I was talking to him on the phone during the pandemic, and it was in the midst of all these very kind of brightly colored, high concept, fun outre books that I had coming out, right? Savage Hearts, Worst Dudes, Know Enough to Fight, Beef Bros, Stone Master, all of a piece in terms of the outward aesthetic as well as the degree of humor and, I don't want to say
Mhm.
silliness, but these were not books that read as like set jaw,
Sure.
stiff upper lip,
Right.
serious,
Yeah,
smart
they were more
comics,
cheeky.
right? Yeah, I mean, like, and I don't know if cheeky really captures it either. It's just because I think a lot of, like, No One Left to Fight's a serious book.
Yeah.
It's a serious book about regrets and not measuring up to what you expected for yourself, and finding a way to be happy, right? That's what that
Mhm.
book's about. But it looks like Lisa Frank folder Dragon Ball, right? And that was an intentional choice, right? Because
Sure.
I like that aesthetic. And
Mhm.
but it didn't serve me well in the market, and it didn't
Right.
serve me well in terms of broader comic book perceptions. And I think the line on me started to become that he does, his books always look really good. Aubrey
Mm.
works with great artists.
Mhm.
It's, he has wacky fun ideas, and people weren't taking it seriously. And I was talking with Robert during the pandemic, around the time that we're talking about, and he said, do you ever just do a book about a man who has a horse and then the horse dies? I said, "Oh, interesting. How many legs does the horse have?" Right? Like, joking, of course, but but the point was well taken, which is that I wasn't helping myself, and I think
Mhm.
Robert went through something very similar, right? And he did it much earlier and found great success much earlier. So maybe there's a
Mhm.
lesson here. But, like, Robert's first books were like Battle Pope. Right, like the
Yeah.
most ridiculous, absurd thing, and it wasn't until he started to do very aggressively straight-faced Walking Dead that he became the superstar. Right, and it's a shame because comics excels at humor so much.
Mhm.
But yeah, man, like, I took a I took several steps back. I went up on my mountain, and we hammered out this new approach, right, to ensure that this next thing I did, because I've never really believed in chasing what is popular. Like people like, oh, fantasy's huge right now. Do
Right.
fantasy, right? Or, middle grade and YA books. They're tearing up the charts. Everybody, you could be the next Raina Tegelmeier. And, well, first of all, no, you can't, right? There's, like, it's just not going to happen. But, like, I've never believed in chasing that stuff, because even if you do, there's no guarantee of success. So
Sure.
then you're still rolling the dice, but you're working on a thing that's not even what you want to be working on, right? So I've never done that. But I did start to think in terms of, okay, how do we spin the perception of what I'm doing, what Jed's doing, and do something that's richer and more complex? And I'll tell you what else, Jim. I realized that I wasn't making the kind of comics that I was seeking out and reading. And,
Mhm.
I was making comics in the way that I had learned how to make comics at Marvel, which is to say assembly line, right?
Right.
I come up with a narrative, and then I break it down into issues, and then I break that down into pages, and then I write each page with, like, about, like, on average 4.5 panels per page, a splash page every once in a while. And then once you do that, there's only like one or two ways that the comic will even work, but it's written in such a way that I can just pass it off to the next person in line, and they can do it hopefully quickly and easily. But it's not actually centering the presentation of visual information, right?
Sure.
It's not centering the reader experience of a physical object that they crack open and enjoy. And that was a really startling realization for me, and
Mm.
because I've always liked to think of myself as a visual writer, and I think I am as far as that type of terminology goes,
Mm.
right? Like my scripts have a lot of action in them. They have um, distinct looking characters, and there's never just talking head pages, right? There's always
Right.
some kind of exciting movement going on. And I take those as obligations as a writer,
Mm.
but that's not sufficient. That's bare min. It's
Well,
not, and
but I
like it's
think
bare minimum. It's bare minimum of what people should be doing. And I realized that the books that I was doing, as proud as I was of them, and am, and I remain, and as much as I love the work of my co-creators on them, the problem was with me. I was the start of the problem because I was ideating these things the same way everybody else in comics ideates comics, which is the way you would pitch a screenplay or a
Mhm.
teleplay, and that's because there are these businesses built up around it, and the the kind of nonsensical assumption that everybody goes along with, but is obviously true, like obviously false, is
Right.
that the people at these publishers have unique knowledge and skill with regards to identifying which stories are going to make them a bunch of money in other mediums, right?
Mm.
Like that's what the business is based on, and I think that's obvious. That's patently nonsense, right? You just
Sure.
look at the hit rates, right? Like the batting averages. Literally any company that does this stuff, like it's obviously nonsense, but it's how everybody ideates and comes up with these things, because
Right.
the first step is getting it past an editor, and the editor, in order to warrant their salary and their paycheck every 2 weeks, they have to weigh in on story. They have to give story notes and on the three act structure and the character arcs and blah 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 and all this stuff. And it's if you lead with that stuff, you're not leading with what's most important, which is the creation of a visual art
Mm.
object, right?
Mm. Right.
And doing something at Image, finally I have the freedom to actually take that approach, right? I don't have an editor sitting over my shoulder wanting to know about this character's character arc over the course of these 4 issues. And not to say that that stuff's not important, it just can't be the sole consideration when
Sure.
mapping out a comic book, in my
Right.
opinion.
Well, so it's been so interesting because you on your newsletter before Free Planet was announced, where you were doing a bunch of analysis, deconstruction on some like really big, all very creator driven stories, comics, and things like that. Um, where I have to imagine that had to have been part of the research process and in executing on Free Planet. But where I'd like to go first is, you are someone who is in a unique-ish position in that you got to see firsthand some very big, talented, creative people pull together ideas and execute. And so, I mean, we were talking about, folks like Jason Aaron and Ibru Baker and Robert, right? You had Robert stuff for a while.
I worked on Civil War, man.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's it. And so, but how do you, that experience obviously gives you a unique lens to look at the art and the process and the craft of comics. But then having had that knowledge, going through what you did in your kind of first creator owned stab and run at stuff, taking a bit of the break, looking at all of the stuff that you've done. How do you look at that experience maybe differently now than maybe you would have a couple years ago, just as in your editorial role and seeing how story got broken down?
Um, it's interesting, man. Because for a really long time, I did not ever talk about my editorial career. I mean, I still don't talk about it
You
online.
really don't.
And that's a conscious choice. That's a decision that I've made because I perceived early on when I left Marvel that I had a big old scarlet E on my back, and I wasn't welcome to pitch at Marvel because that would be nepotism, and I wasn't
Hmm.
welcome to pitch at DC because I was a Marvel guy, and I wasn't welcome to pitch at these other places because I was a mainstream guy, right? And like it was this
Right.
hilarious position that I'd found myself in, that I knew more about comics than most people writing. I had worked on incredible comics. I knew everybody in comics, and yet it wasn't a viable thing to bring me on board. So I very early on kind of squashed discussion of my editorial background. Also because, like, I don't know, I never wanted to be one of these people who was trying to traffic on a job that they had 20 years ago.
Sure.
And I think it's embarrassing, and I and I wanted people to focus on the writing, and so it's only been this cycle.
Right.
I used to, when I would set up interviews and podcasts with people, I would just straight up say, I don't want to talk about my editorial career. I don't want to mention it. It's not interesting to me, and I'm here to promote my work, right?
Hmm.
Not like a book that I assisted on,
Sure.
however long ago. So yeah, it's an interesting, and I stopped doing that, obviously,
Right.
because
Well,
every
like
single podcast I've done for this cycle, it's come up, right? Which is very
well,
funny to me.
but I think the difference now, though, right, is, or at least, for this situation between us, is that you can't discount that experience, right?
No,
Like that is like the work that you put in during that time, regardless of what you worked on and who you worked with, the experience that you got from that has made, as part and part, has an influence on the stuff that you will continue to make kind of in the future. And I think
no, you're right.
but you've got a more unique lens than someone just trying to come in and figure out, how do I make comics, because you know how comics are made. And so, like, so is that, and it
That
sounds
is the
like
big, so that's the big difference, like what you just outlined,
right.
like that is the thing. And it's funny, it cuts a couple ways, right? Because I alluded to it a minute ago that I've always been, I've always worked within kind of like the standard Marvel DC mode, which
Sure.
isn't just the Marvel DC mode. Because, I mean, because they're such a huge SWAT, um, component part of the market, that it impacts everything. If you're doing books anywhere in the US direct market, chances are you're writing them more or less the way that Marvel and DC do
Hmm.
things, right? And that's something that I learned it there, and I internalized it, and that's how I've always approached books. And it's only been a recent thing that I started to actively break myself of that. And that's the bad part, right? That's like the albatross around my neck.
Right. But you don't
Just
know, how to break it without really knowing
maybe, I don't know.
how it
I
works,
don't I don't
right?
know if that's, we'd have to, it's hard for me to say, right? Because like I learned this stuff when I was like, I started interning when I was like 19 or
Sure.
20 or something at Marvel, right? So like
Right.
it's very much baked in. But I mean, the other aspect of it, like the good part, right? The good thing about this editorial experience, I was, get ready, I'm gonna drop a name.
Here we go.
When I was hassling poor acclaimed novelist Jonathan Lethem about giving us a blurb for Free Planet. I was at his house and we were chit chatting, and I was telling him, I was lamenting
Damn, not
what
even not
an
even a name drop, but like, I was at his house.
I was at his house. Yeah, he made me a ham and cheese sandwich. It was delicious. But I was lamenting the fact that I am a nightmarish micromanager. Like I was, and I say this all the time. Like, I'm shocked that Taylor Esposito letters all my books, and I'm shocked that that's still the case, because I'm such a terror. And Vittorio Estoni, is, we're working with him for the first time on Free Planet, and he's amazing. But I'm shocked he hasn't quit, because we have such specific ideas. And I was telling Jonathan about this, and I said, I'm just, I'm a really notorious micromanager, and I imagine it's really difficult for people. And he stopped me. He said, "No, no, 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 no. You're an auteur, right?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, that sounds much better. Let's go with that. That's better." But like, but that's the thing. Like, that's what I got out of my editorial background, and that's what
Sure.
I'm able to bring to Free Planet. Even though Free Planet is a very different process and approach, and something like
Hmm.
Free Planet could never fly, not just at Marvel or DC, but at any of these companies where they view, and this isn't a knock, it's just it's a fact, right? Like, if you're talking about Oni or Boom or even Skybound, right? Like, these companies are set up to make money. They're set up to like launch properties and IPs, and they want and they need to have control over the stuff that they're creating, that they're paying
Right.
for, and that's part of the deal. And that's fine, but the approach that we're doing on Free Planet wouldn't work there, right?
Mhm.
And it just wouldn't fly. And the only reason we're able to do something that is as holistically minded in its approach, inclusive of all the disciplines, right? Like the reason we're able to do something that really rejects this notion of assembly line comics is because Jed and I get all of it. We
Mhm.
know. Like I can't color. I can letter a book. It takes forever, and so I don't like doing it. I can't color a book, but I understand enough about color theory and digital coloring and just how this stuff works. And
Mhm.
that comes from getting to work at Marvel and hop on the phone with Dean White or Maury Hollowell or Frankie
Right.
D'Armata or Laura Martin, or like the list goes on of these incredible, generational talents that I got to work with. And that's true too, with artists, right? Like what better education for understanding how a comic book comes together than looking at John Romita Jr. layouts as he does them.
Right.
Right? Like
Yeah.
and that's the big thing. Like that's really what I've been like the boon of my editorial background. And I am realizing now how central that is to my approach to comics. And
Mhm.
I truthfully, it might be, it's it's the reason I wasn't a good editor also, right? Right? Because I didn't want to be an editor. I wanted to be the
Sure.
auteur.
Right.
I wanted to be the writer running the show, telling
Mhm.
everybody what they need to be doing, choosing talent, not beholden to anybody else. And that's clearly not the job. But it's what prevented me from being better at it there, and it's likely prevented me from having more success at other publishers as well, too, if I'm being honest with myself. But that's I don't know. That's what's so exciting about Free Planet to me is
Well, and
it's making good on this.
I think that's one of the things that also makes Free Planet such an interesting book, right? And why it is being published at a place like Image, right? Because you're doing things in this book, and I am gonna, we're 20 minutes in, and I want you to basically tell everyone what the book is about.
It's my
But this is a
favorite
book.
shit. This is like a I gotta interrupt you because this is like a repeating problem. Jen and I did Comics Pro, which for people who don't know, like why would you know this? This is deranged inside baseball stuff, but it's a big industry meeting of comic book retailers, and it was in LA this year. And and Jed and I, my co-creator on Free Planet, went. We brought the ash cans and gave them out and talked up the book and roundtables and all. And Jed had to keep nudging me during these roundtables, which are like
to talk
it's like
about the book.
speed dating with retailers, right? You get like four or five of them every 10 minutes. And he
Yeah.
kept on having to nudge me halfway through. He'd be like, tell him what the book's about, dummy. Because I get so caught up in like the approach is what I call
Right.
it. Cause it is different. But yeah, I'm sorry. I
Well,
interrupted you.
it's so, I mean, basically, like, one of the things that I love to talk about, and is this medium allows you to do things with storytelling that are, quite frankly, impossible in any other medium. And I think Free Planet is a great example of that, right? Where
Thank you.
this is a book that is put together by someone who has decades of experience in the business, but like you said, like, you've done the assembly line kind of way, and that is a certain kind of book
And there's
that
nothing wrong with it.
there's
Like,
nothing
and I,
wrong. There's
this
nothing
is,
wrong with that, but those books not all the time take full advantage of what you can do with comics,
they
right? And
can't.
that's not,
Yeah.
and it's right, and so, but when given the opportunity to, right, it really shows the strength of the medium. And I believe Free Planet is like, and like you said, like, there's other books that you've talked about in your newsletter, right? Like, I think the one I go to a lot is, and it's one of my favorite books of all time, is what Simonson did it with Orion. Like, it is
Hell yeah. It's
probably
one of
my,
my favorite.
but
It's
like,
one of my favorite books of all time
but to
too. Yeah.
me, to me, like, yes, did the stuff that he did on Thor, like, brilliant and great and phenomenal? Yes, but Orion feels like Simonson completely unleashed, right?
Yeah.
Like, it is the full Simonson kind of experience of him as a creator in comics, right? In the comic book form. So that being said, let's talk. Let's pitch Free Planet on what it is. I'm gonna say, can you do it in a minute?
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
and
The
then
answer's
we will
yes.
go from there. Okay, ready? Time starts now.
Free Planet is about the first completely free planet in human history. They've just won a brutal revolutionary war against a corporate dominated oligarchy with tendrils stretching out throughout the galaxy. It's the only place you can find a uniquely potent energy source, which has made them a target of multiple galactic superpowers. The only people protecting the planet are the Freedom Guard, a group of revolutionary heroes all deeply committed to the dream of a free planet. But, Jim, just like in this great nation of ours, they all have completely different ideas about what complete freedom entails. And that's what drives all the drama, all the big geopolitical maneuvering, all of the explosive military action, and all of the intense interpersonal drama, because after all, it is a space opera. A geopolitical space opera is what we're calling it. How much time do I have? Time? Can I get more
10 seconds to
in?
spare.
Ah!
No, look, that's great. And so, okay, so now we're
done.
The
That's the
state,
show.
We're done. That's it. I gotta get back to doing other life things. No, doing something big in space and all of that is, the canvas there almost feels a bit unlimited when you kind of set that as the backdrop. How in this do you begin to where? How do you begin to make the rules for yourself in how the world works, right? And like where basically is the border, your electric fence border for you when telling the story, that if you get too close, you get zapped to basically, that kind of breaks it maybe.
That's an interesting question because honestly, everything about Free Planet is designed for us to have space, for us to have room, and to be able to do whatever we want, right? And it's, yeah, it's a tough question to answer, Jim, because I don't think there really are. I don't think I have really set up any kind of guardrails, which maybe I don't know. No, that's not a problem. It's good. No, because it's. So I think again, it's a fundamentally different approach to how I've certainly done comics in the past, and I think it's honestly, I go to the shop every week and I check out all the new books and I see what people are doing, and I think it's fundamentally different from what else is on the racks right now. And that's not to say better necessarily, but different. And it's what's different about the approach is Free Planet's not a situation where we said, okay, here's the narrative. Here are the character arcs, here are the acts, here's where things are going to end up. It's it's there is a story, but that's not the primary reason to read Free Planet, right? We took very seriously this idea that, I mean, and this is something I've always felt to be true in my work, and I've tried to, exhibit through my work, is that a good story is not something that a creator tells somebody. It's not even something that a creator shows somebody, right? This isn't a show don't tell thing. That's another bugaboo I could go off on. But it's a good story, a good narrative, and this is especially true in comics because of like the formal aspects of how comics works. A good story is something that a reader puts together on their own.
Mm.
Right? And that has colored everything about Free Planet, such that, the groundwork for Free Planet, I've talked a lot places about the amount of research that I've done, the amount of design work that Jed has done, and it's ongoing. It's a rolling thing. We're constantly doing it. And the reason we do that is to create depth and verisimilitude, as well as to allow such that Free Planet is not just a story that you're going to get from point A to point B. It is a look at a world that you as a reader are free to pull what you want from it and hopefully discover some things and ruminate on some stuff. Some of my favorite novels growing up were all just Huxley books, which is a very strange thing to say. And like, Brave New World, sure, but I really liked Point Counterpoint. That was my favorite. And it is a book about with a vast cast of characters, and they all have very, very distinct ideas about everything, and they're not shy about sharing it. And things happen around them, but the driving interest of the story is these characters. Like, what keeps you engaged as a reader is these very realistic, very fleshed out, complex characters butting heads about everything, right? And that was first and foremost what we wanted to create, right? We wanted something where all the drama would kind of arise naturally out of this complex world we've built, as opposed to doing it the other way around, which is usually how things go, right? You figure out your basic story skeleton, and then you add complexity on top of that. So we took very much a different approach to it, man. And you know, my intent is that there aren't any guardrails, right?
Okay.
And we hop like the first 6 issues are completely done, and we hop all over the place, right? Like checking in on different planets and different civilizations, and that is not done at random. It's but instead of choosing what we're showing audiences based on story and narrative requirements, which is how you end up with pages of connective tissue just like moving things into place, which is boring, and it's endemic with this assembly line approach to comics. Instead of that, we make choices in terms when we're looking at these big spreads or even individual pages. We choose what we're going to include based on thematic concerns, right?
Mhm.
So you might see like a graph or a chart or an infographic that's not explicitly connected to the scene that's taking place around it on the page, but it does have thematic impact, and hopefully will affect how readers actually engage with the material on the page.
That's fair. This next question is may sound flippant, and I don't mean it that way, but I've heard you talk a lot about um, what feels like the theory of the book. What to you is the heart? What is the beating heart of the book?
Oh, it's not wanting anybody telling you what to do ever. No, I mean that's what it's
Yeah, I
about,
mean
right?
that's yeah.
Like Free Planet is like people have asked me. A buddy of mine, Daniel Friedman, who's a great comic book writer, he was asking me. He's like, "You've done all this research. You've been reading all these giant books about revolutions and civil wars and nation building." And he had read like the first 2 or 3 issues, I think, and he was like, "So I'm
Mhm.
still getting through with it. But like, do you ever come to a conclusion?" And I was like, and I say no. Like, and that's the point, right? Like, there is not a there's not a direct metaphor. There's not a
Mhm.
message to decode. There's not a riddle to figure out what Free Planet's about. Free Planet is about what everybody wants, which is freedom, which is nobody telling you what to do, which is the ability to live your life and do what you want to do without anybody getting in your goddamn way. Which is something I feel very passionately about, and I think most people do, right? Especially in this country. But yeah, that's the heart of it, man. It's a bunch of people wanting complete freedom, but struggling with the realities of creating something together while maintaining that.
Fan goes in, reads first issue. What is your big hope that is their takeaway from the first issue?
What do I hope they take away from the first
Yep.
issue? I want them to be overwhelmed.
Mm.
I want them to be overwhelmed by the complexity and the depth such that they read it again, such that they have questions. There's back matter in each issue that gives some additional world building stuff and also sets things up from the future and provides additional context on things you've just seen. But there's also an email address in the back that I hope people utilize for questions about the history of that world and what's going on in that world, because we get into a lot of it, but we don't get into everything, but it's all planned out. And I would love, my hope is that people are so taken with the richness of what we've created that they want to know more and that they email us with questions. Like, I don't think for me in this book, it's less about people taking away a specific message or idea and more about using the form and the medium to prompt people to engage with big ideas.
Love it. So then, What gets them to issue 2?
Oh, well, there's a lot. I think the first so I think the first thing is the characters, right? The cast, the core cast, and you don't get to meet all of them. You see all of them in issue, although issue 2 debuts a brand new character who's my favorite. So that's a good reason to come back up and come back around and check out Jackson Crater. But I think what is gonna really grab people in terms of like, holy cow, I need to read the next one of these. I think it is the approach, right? I think that's
Mm-hmm.
a big part of it, is that it is different. There's not another book like this. It takes longer to read. Even me, when I'm reading lettering for it, I get like 1 or 2 pages in, and I'm like, holy cow, I need to adjust the speed at which I'm reading these things, because you have to read it slower than you do an
Mm-hmm.
average
A
comic, like
regular
it's
book.
something else
Yep.
on the shelf. So I think the complexity is going to bring people back, and also the characters. Jed's character designs are phenomenal, and there's a big spread of the full cast in the first issue, and we did that early on because we want people to refer back to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
To remind themselves who these characters are and get a feel for who they are from these very kind of like informative descriptions, and see how that changes as they meet these characters. But we don't go into detail on all of them in the first issue. So people are going to be, if they want to know what's up with the guy in the giant battle suit or the big yoked up scientist, right? They're going to have to come back for issue 2 to find out more about those. So I think that the characters are really going to do some heavy lifting and getting people back for issue 2.
Love that. So that I do want to talk about Jed's work in this because I feel like that is
No one else could have drawn this book. No, like
he's
it wouldn't have worked
doing
with anybody else.
so. Okay, so let's talk about that. In that, what do you feel that you and Jed are tapping into with Jed's ability that makes Jed the only person who can do this?
It's Chaikin's approach. We're picking up on what Chaikin started doing in the early 80s. And it I think that it's a largely abandoned evolutionary path for comics because it is not conducive to the way that comics as an industry is structured. It's too time consuming, right? And what is it? That's a great question. The Chaikin approach, it's what I've been describing this whole time. It is viewing comics not as a series of images, but as a collection of pages, right? And this sounds pedantic and and unimportant, but it's crucially important because if you're thinking about comics as panels, all you're doing is trying to cram your story into an appropriate number of panels such that they could conceivably fit on a page. If you're thinking about comics as pages, you are thinking about the reader experience every time they turn a page, right? And what they're confronted with. And Jed is a guy who I met through Howard. He was working as Howard's assistant.
Oh
Howard is a
wow.
guy. Howard is a guy I met when I was at Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
We worked together. I got him drawing every book I could because I loved working with him so much, right? But even that work at Marvel at the time, that wasn't in accordance with Chekinian comics theory because it couldn't be because he was drawing scripts work for hire that have been written by other guys who were not thinking about the page in this way, right? And again, it's not a knock on them. They couldn't just because of the nature of the machine that they were part of.
Mm-hmm.
So Jed is uniquely placed to make good on this kind of promise of the Chakinian approach to comics, right? It's something you see in American Flag, of course. The Shadow by Chaikin is one of my favorite examples of it. Times Squared, Black Kiss, right? Stuff that Image publishes. Um, it's it's completely different, and a lot of that stuff has been picked up, like the aesthetics of it, like the surface level aesthetics of it, been picked up by other people. Like a really noticeable one, people don't even realize it comes from Howard. The idea of lots of small panels of TV screens with like talking heads talking about stuff. People think that Frank Miller made that up in Dark Knight Returns. Chaikin was doing it like 2 years earlier in American Flag when they were sharing a studio together in New York, right? Like this stuff has become part of the comics language, layering in wall of sound effects behind characters. That's a Chaikin thing. That's now just, it shows up everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that stuff is great. And I've always tried to utilize aspects like that. But it's not sufficient. It's not enough. And Jed's game. And the other aspect, not only has this preternatural understanding of the comic book page and how to design and lay out a page. He not only has that, but he is a stellar draftsman. He's a tremendous art. I think he's a better artist than Howard is. How about that? Don't tell Howard. I think Howard would agree with me. Like Jed can draw anything. Jed is a
Yep.
naturally gifted artist, and um, I've yet to throw something at him that he cannot handle, and I continue to try. I continue trying to come up with things that are just going to stump him that he's not able to do, but it all works. And so it is, it's a blend of this very design oriented approach to the page, but drawn with lush, overwhelming detail. His ink
Mhm.
work is just absurd, and the amount of visual information that he's packing into the pages is unprecedented. It's wild, and that's why, man. I don't think
Yep.
anybody else would have been up to the task, quite frankly.
When it comes to the character designs for this book, how much of it is Jed and how much of it is micromanager Aubrey?
That's interesting. I think it varies character to character, right? Like, so
Okay.
I came up with before we even had names, before we had story in place, before we even really had the world fleshed out. I knew that this was going to be a book about post-revolution, right? And it was going to be about revolutionary heroes in the midst of trying to build this new world. And so we started with archetypes
Mm.
that were pulled from two sources and then kind of smashed together, right? There are archetypes from science fiction, right? Like
Yep.
classic 60s, 70s prose science fiction, and as well as archetypes from revolutionary struggles, right? So I would have things like, oh, this is the guerrilla, the tactical genius guerrilla fighter, right? And this is the indigenous person who joined up with the struggle, and
Mm.
this is the battlefield analyst AI who developed a conscience over the course. Like, so I had
Mm.
these kind of like broad archetypes figured out, and you can see them still all on the page. And I sent those to Jed, and we started kicking things around back and forth. And some of them he just nailed instantly, and I was like, "Yep, that's it. That's great." But like my micromanaging takes a back seat when it's Jed's turn to micromanage, right?
Mhm.
Because like
Right.
Jed's a genius with this stuff. Jed doesn't
Mhm.
need me giving him notes on character design, and what's more, oftentimes his designs for these characters would impact story stuff, right? Just because
Right.
of the way he drew them, and like simple stuff like, oh, this guy's a scar, so oh, where did the scar come from? But as well as just kind of I don't know. There's one character, Fueja. She's one of the religious figures in the book. She's got red hair, and over the course of the book, I realized, oh shit, he's drawn. She's a Jamie Hewlett character. He's drawing her like Tank Girl. So I started writing her a little bit more like Tank Girl, right? And that's part of the natural evolution of working on serialized comics, and so I would never want to get in the way of that. Similarly,
Right.
I do thumbnails, right? And this is part of the approach. This is the essential component of the approach for me, which is that I do thumbnails before I script to ensure that each page is something visually overwhelming and there is no connective tissue or perfunctory pages. But those thumbnails, I've never shown them to Jed because he doesn't need it,
Oh, that's
right?
awesome.
And so
That's
like
cool.
so yeah, so like my scripts are very granular in terms of like, okay, so there's gonna be a graph down in this panel, and I've done like a sketch of this infographic that I'd like you to do a version of, and then there's inset panels here, and like I'm very very granular in terms of what I'm asking for, but when it comes to how he interprets that, which frequently entails massive changes to what I had initially envisioned, I step back,
Mm.
because Jed's the best in the business. He doesn't need me telling him what to do.
Mm. I love that. So, how would you say then your ability to be a creator in a collaborative relationship that is something like Free Planet and comics um, has changed over the years? What have you learned about being a collaborator that you feel makes you a better collaborator now than maybe Aubrey of 5 years ago?
Aubrey of 5 years ago was still very much building projects around who was willing to work with him
Mm.
and what would make them happiest and be easiest for them to just absolutely crush and knock out of the park, right? Savage Hearts is a really good example. That's my previous book with Jed. Jed draws fantastic muscle babes, just like beautiful women just heaped with muscle. And so what do we do together? A a romantic comedy with a big buff barbarian babe set in a sweaty jungle with lots of flesh on display, right? And that was always my kind of thinking, because I I'm very picky when it comes to art. I'm very picky about all of it, but especially with artists, I have really really high standards, and I want specific things, and I want artists who can do this. I have a long list of requirements for artists that I work with, and because I'm not a big star, because I don't have a really big name, I don't. I can't just show up and say, "Hey, you do exactly this," and you're going to be on board because like I'm not an automatic lottery ticket like
Hmm.
working with some writers are, right? And so I was very much in the mindset that, okay, first and foremost, I need to keep this person, I need to keep my co-creators happy, and I need to build stuff around solely around what their strengths are, and then I can try and figure out everything else around that. And Aubrey of 2025 doesn't fuck around with that anymore.
Mm.
Aubrey of 2025 has more fully embraced, this role of auteur. Honestly, like, if I don't know, it feels arrogant. I like telling that story about Jonathan Lethem. A, because it's a good opportunity to name drop, and B, because it justifies me in calling
It
myself
lets
an
you say, yeah,
auteur
it lets
later.
you,
Yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah. But it still feels weird. I don't like it.
This is very clearly the long form plot development that you talk about, right?
Yeah, that's right. I
You're,
seeded it earlier in the
you
interview. That's
seeded it
exactly
earlier.
it. No, we're making good on it. No, but I mean, like, that's the big change. That and kind of the level of effort and work that I'm putting into these things. The degree of research is absurd, right? Even I used to refer to my comic book story professional wrestling as exhaustively and exhaustingly researched, but it doesn't hold a candle to the stuff that we've done for Free Planet. Which is wild because one's a nonfiction book and one's completely made up. But it's just the nature of the research. For the wrestling book, I knew enough about wrestling to know what blanks I had to get filled in, so I would seek out specific stuff about you know English wrestling or what have you. Whereas with Free Planet, it's more of a wholesale deep dive into all kinds of subjects, right? Like, I'm reading a big
Right.
old thing about the polis, in ancient Greek, and how it was structured and how it evolved and stuff like that. And it's because we're building out a fictional world. I don't really know what I need to research. It's more
Mm.
about searching for stuff that I think, oh, okay, this I can plug in. This is going to help me flesh out what we're doing. But yeah, man, that's a massive change from Aubrey of 5 years ago. I never did this amount of research for stuff, and I regret it, quite frankly, because the work is better for it.
At the beginning of this, when in the intro, when I said we're going to talk to Aubrey about what he's still doing in comics. I think the last 50 or so minutes have fully explained and elaborated on all of that. So the only place I'm gonna leave you and to give you back some of your time is what makes you excited about the future of comics and being in comics.
I think that comics has untapped depths. I think that
Still.
still, I mean, I think Free Planet's proof of that, honestly. Our approach to the page, our approach to, like, I keep coming back to this, but for the past 20 years or so, we've been very locked into a teleplay, screenplay informed approach to comics. And it was very new and revolutionary at the time, but it leaves a lot of tools on the table. And I think that comics has unprecedented amounts, it offers creators unparalleled amounts of freedom to tell stories in unique and different ways because of the thing that I mentioned earlier, which is that, I mean, this is true for every medium, right? That it's really on the the audience to build up this narrative in their head. But it's even more true in comics because comics is static images, right?
Mm.
And the ability to, if you take a few steps back and you look at comics as a collection of pages, you have these outrageous opportunities to catalyze and prompt rumination in a reader, right? Based not just on da 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 story beats, right, and what the actual plot and narrative is, but things like juxtaposition and proximity, right? An example that I like pointing to because it's in the very first issue of Free Planet, the Freedom Guard responds to a artisanal extraction operation with, and they have a shootout and it's a tense moment, and they're telling this guy that he can't use his land the way that he wants to be using it, even though it's been his family for generations, and he's not part of some big evil conglomerate. He's just some guy, and they're cracking down on him, and he's like, this is unjust. This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't the freedom I was looking for. And that on its surface appears oppressive, right? It appears authoritarian and very much at odds with the message of this new world that's being built. But if you dig into the graphs that are also
Mm.
on that page, it illustrates the dire economic realities of the planet, which hopefully, in some readers at least, will prompt maybe a little additional thought about whether those actions are justified or not, right?
Mm.
And stuff like that. I think that's a really good example of ways that we can use the comic book form such that instead of just burning through it as quickly as we can get to it, reading dialogue, in which the imagery is perfunctory and just kind of tangential to the narrative being told, we can actually start to create real literary depth. And I think that goes hand in hand with treating comics like what they are, which is an art object. And that's what's most exciting to me, is that I think that we've only kind of scratched this. We as a medium, a worldwide medium, have really only scratched the surface of what comics can do, right? And comics that do function as literature and art object.
It's perfect. Aubrey, talking with you is always a blast.
This is so fun. Can
Every
we
time.
keep going? I know this is long enough for the podcast, but let's just stay on after this if we could.
I look. It was one of those things where at some point I was wondering if I was going to mention talking about Howard Chaykin. I'm going to leave this in. Is that I'll never forget one of the first emails I got from Howard Chaykin when I was working at Marvel. I noticed that he signed his emails HC, both in all caps, and I thought, man, that is the coolest thing ever. And I did it ever since.
Hell
I've done
yeah!
it ever since.
You got that from Howie.
Thanks,
He hates
thanks,
that.
Howard.
You got it from Howard. Yeah, no, he's the best. He's my comics uncle. I think that his impact on the medium is difficult to fully articulate to folks because it's sneaky. It's kind of
Mm.
like the thing that people say about the Velvet Underground, right? Which is like, you know, only however many people bought that album, but they all
Right.
went and formed bands. And I think the same thing is true of Howard and American Flag, and it's especially because, its influence is hidden because, it predated Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen. It
Mm.
came out at least a year or two before both of those, and it was the first salvo in this 80s push towards comics as a more, doing genre comics, but as a more serious, in a more serious adult way.
Yep.
And it wasn't kept in print because it wasn't owned by DC Comics, right? And so its influence has kind of gotten lost. But, if you scratch the surface of, I don't know, I don't know where this started, but people people including, not just me, refer to him as the architect of the modern comic book, and I think that's
Mm.
true. I don't think that's overblown. I think that that's
Mm-hmm.
accurate because he and you can see it in earlier work too, right? He staked out a mission of doing comics that achieve literary depth. And a lot of people talk about that kind of stuff. A lot of people point, they're a ton of different comic series that people say, oh, it's like a novel. It's dense and rich like a novel. But usually what they mean is just it's a lot of words on the page, right? What Howard did that was different is that Howard used the comic book medium to express that depth, right? And it's something we're trying to follow in his footsteps on Free Planet. And Free Planet has a lot of words also, but they're designed with a Chaykinian approach to the page so that they actually impact and carry their own weight and fit into the overall design of the page. And it's a Howard thing. It's very much a love letter to the Chaykinian approach to comics.
Free Planet on sale May 7th. Aubrey Sitterson, Jed Dougherty. Go pick it up. Aubrey,
get in there.
This has been a blast.
It's always fun. It's always a pleasure, sir. Thank you for having me.
Well, there you have it, everyone. Another episode of Let's Talk Comics done, signed, sealed, delivered. And it's one of those ones that sometimes, you talk to someone and they get you so energized that you just kind of like want to run through a wall for them. This is kind of what that felt like, in a sense, for me at certain points. So thank you, Aubrey, for taking the time to chat with us and, just dropping some knowledge bombs about comics and passion and, what it means to make something that you feel matters. Free Planet is not just a fun read, even though it is that. It's a shot of pure energy. It's bold, radical. It's the kind of book we need more of in comics. So, if anything in this conversation lit a fire under you, do yourself a favor. Head on over to your local comic book shop and pre-order Free Planet. Tell your friends. Help spread the word. Anything to help support this book, you should go do, because it deserves your love and attention. But seriously, I love this chat. I hope you did too. If you're digging the show, if you're digging this podcast, Let's Talk Comics, make sure to follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever your podcast platform of choice is. Hit us, leave a review. I've dialed back a little bit on the begging for reviews, but I'm going to keep asking for them because they help. and so you're going to keep getting them. Like I said, the support has been absolutely phenomenal. The comments that we get on each episode have been a blast to read. It makes us feel like that we're doing something right here. And so we're going to keep that train rolling. Also, let us know what books you're loving, what creators you want to hear from, and we'll keep bringing you these deep dives with the folks that make comics what they are. And as always, whether you're listening to this on New Comic Book Day, Wednesday, or on Saturday, or any other day ending in Y, if you're going to make a trip over to the comic book shop, go pick something. Go just pick up one book that's new. One book that you didn't think you would like or weren't sure about, and give it a shot. Because you're going to be doing a whole bunch of people a world of favors just by doing that. And you may just discover your new favorite comic that you had no idea about. So, as long as you keep reading comics, we're going to keep talking about them. So until next time, folks, be real.